بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلوات ربي وسلامه على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وبعد. To continue inshallah with the Muhaddab min Ihya Ulumuddin by Sheikh Salih Al-Shami rahimahullah ta'ala hayyan wa mayta, and we have arrived at the fifth point of Al-Af'al Al-Batinah when reciting the Quran. So inner actions and inner points of reflection that are necessary when we read the Quran. And the author, Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, Al-Khamis, so we stopped here last time. الخامس التفهم وهو أن يستوضح من كل آية ما يليق بها إذ القرآن يشتمل على ذكر صفات الله عز وجل وذكر أفعاله وذكر أحوال الأنبياء عليهم السلام وذكر أحوال المكذبين لهم وأنهم كيف أهلكوا وذكر أوامره وزواجره وذكر الجنة والنار. So the fifth point when we are reciting the Quran is التفهم. And we did touch upon this point last time, and we said that at-tafahum is to exert effort in extracting understanding. So to exert effort in understanding something. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِنَّمَا الْعِلْمُ بِالتَّعَلُّمِ. He said that knowledge is via way of learning. At-ta'allum, and the at-tafa'ul, the verb pattern in Arabic, it suggests that there is some effort that is to be applied. And he said, وَإِنَّمَا الْحِلْمُ بِالتَّحَلُّمِ أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. And to acquire or to be a person of hilm, halim, which is someone who is perhaps laid back and a person of good character, generally speaking, it requires at-tahallum, where a person exerts effort in the acquirement of that particular quality. So here at-tafahum is to exert one's effort in trying to understand that which they are reading, meaning the Quran. And he says, he gives the particular meaning here. وهو أن يستوضح من كل آية ما يليق بها أو ما يليق بها. He says that it is ما يليق بها. He says that it is to seek clarity. To seek clarity, to try to understand and to try to acquire clarity with every ayah, that which is suitable for it. He says, إِذَا الْقُرْآنِ يَشْتَمِلُ عَلَى ذِكْرِ صِفَاتِ اللَّهِ, as the Quran contains within it the mentioning of the attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal and His actions, so the attributes, His sifat and His af'al, His actions. And likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He mentions the states and the circumstances of the prophets, and also those who denied the prophets, the مُكَذِّبِينَ لَهُمْ وَأَنَّهُمْ كَيْفَ أَهْلَكُوا, and how Allah destroyed these people. وَذِكْرِ أَوَامِرِهِ وَزَوَاجِرِهِ, and likewise you will find in the Quran the mention of Allah's instructions, His commands, and also His prohibitions, and also Jannah and Nar. So now he's going to go through the sifat. He says, أَمَّا صِفَاتُ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ فَكَقَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. He says, so for example, a mention of the attributes of Allah Azza wa Jalla in the Quran, Allah says, ليس كمثله شيء, there is nothing like Him. وهو السميع البصير, and He is the all-hearing, the all-seeing. And so how do I interact with that? So how do we interact with that? How do we interact with the fact that Allah is as-Sami' al-Basir? There is a theological perspective, so we affirm that attribute. But then what about the practical application? It is to know that Allah is all hearing. So Allah hears me at all times. And Allah does not only hear that which I say with my tongue, but rather He hears that which I say internally and externally. Allah, He hears my thoughts as well as hearing that which I verbalize. Therefore, I should be conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and that which I say, my speech, internally and externally. So for example, I walk into the masjid and I see someone and I say something internally which I would not say externally because it would be considered a sin. I'm going to be held accountable for that. I see someone, I say, look at this person showing off. With my heart, I say it. Or I say someone and I say, this person is uncivilized. This person is uncultivated. This person, look at him. I see someone and I say, look at this so-and-so. It's haram. Allah hears. And so that will be written down. As for intrusive thoughts, wasawis, that which enters into the arena of thought, the mind, and we are not in control of that, that's different. We say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, and we're not held accountable for it. Let's say a thought comes to my mind, I see an attractive woman, and a thought comes. I say, A'udhu billah. I dismiss it, and then I'm not held accountable for it. When am I held accountable for it? If it comes from myself, i.e., I'm looking at her and I'm saying, look at that attractive woman to myself, and I'm saying things to myself about her. Or, for example, I'm looking at someone, I'm saying derogatory things about that person. Or if I allow those thoughts to dwell in my mind, a thought comes and I don't dispel it, then that's where the problem lies. And it doesn't mean that I have to get it out of my head. No, simply, A'udhu billah, astaghfirullah, that's enough. Because we don't want to become obsessive over these things. And al-basir, so how do I interact with the attribute of Allah Azza wa Jal being basir? Firstly, of course, by attributing that Allah sees all things to Him. Secondly, by being aware of this. By being aware of this in my life. And so technically, the believer does not need a CCTV camera in order to stay away from doing bad things. Why? Because Allah Azza wa Jal is enough for him. Whether he is in private or in public, he is aware of Allah's sight over him. And then he says, وَقَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى الْمَلِكُ الْقُدُّوسَ السَّلَامُ الْمُؤْمِنُ الْمُهَيْمِنُ الْعَزِيزُ الْجَبَّارُ الْمُتَكَبِّرُ. And so again, the same kind of exercise that we went through just now, you would go through with these attributes or these names of Allah Azza wa Jal. And then he says, فَلْيَتَأَمَّلْ مَعَانِي. How do we interact? He says, فَلْيَتَأَمَّلْ مَعَانِيَ هَذِهِ الْأَسْمَاءِ وَالصِّفَاتِ لِيَنْكَشِفَ لَهُ أَسْرَارَهَا. He will reflect over the meanings of these names and these actions. Why? So that the secrets of these names and attributes will be revealed to him. And what does he mean by secrets? I.e., the practical kind of application, the impact will be revealed to him. It's like a gift from Allah Azza wa Jal. For example, if you ask a person who doesn't speak Arabic, what does Ar-Rahman mean? They might know because it's something which is common, the most merciful. But ask them, what does Al-Jabbar mean? Many won't know. Ask a scholar of the Arabic language, what does Al-Jabbar mean? And they will start to give you meanings. Ar-Rabb, what does Rabbul Alameen mean? People will say Lord. But then when you look at the link between Ar-Rabb and Tarbiyah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who nurtures and sustains and grows something. And so you turn to Allah with that name with a different type of feeling. And so the impact is dependent upon what? The understanding. And this is something which is very beneficial for a person. And there is a cure in knowing the names and attributes of Allah. There is a cure in it from anxiety, from OCDs, from depression, and from many mental health issues. Because we attach ourselves to Allah and we detach ourselves from ourselves and this dunya, which is the cause of many of our mental health problems. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, فَتَحْتَهَا مَعَانٍ لَا تَنْكَشِفُ إِلَّا لِلْمُوَفَّقِينَ. So within these names and these attributes, there are meanings that are only revealed to those who are given tawfiq by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وإليه أشار علي رضي الله تعالى عنه بقوله ما أسر إلي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم شيئا كتمه عن الناس إلا أن يؤتي الله عز وجل عبدا فهما في كتابه فليكن حريصا على طلب ذلك الفهم. And so Imam Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, he gives the example, something that Ali radhiyallahu anhu, he said that there is nothing that has been kept from the people except for a slave being given understanding of his book. I.e., not everyone is able to acquire an understanding of the Quran. It's a gift from Allah Azza wa Jal. And it's dependent on the Arabic language before anything else. Dependent upon the Arabic language. So I'm not saying, nor is Imam al-Ghazali, of course, rahimahullah ta'ala, that a person can open the book and start to reflect and come up with their own meanings. No, it's a scholarly endeavor. And so the Arabic language is key. And you cannot do the same with the English. You cannot open the book of Allah Azza wa Jal in English, the translation, and say, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Let me go and see what does the most merciful mean? Because it's not the same word. It's the closest word that the translator has found. And perhaps the word merciful is rooted in something else. But the word Ar-Rahman, coming from Rahma and so on and so forth, Ar-Rahim from Rahma, and the link between that and the Rahim, and all of these things. The Arabic language is very deep. It's very deep. A person can study Arabic for his entire life and he will not master it. Not to say that he won't be able to speak fluently and read and understand, yes, but mastery of Arabic language, there are levels to it. And there are roughly 11 to 12 branches of knowledge that would have to be studied in order for a person to become a scholar in the Arabic language. The more a person learns about Arabic, the more the Quran opens up to him. Likewise, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And if a person wants to understand Arabic, something which helps drastically is to memorize the Quran and to memorize the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And then he says, وَأَمَّا أَفْعَالُهُ تَعَالَى فَكَذِكْرِهِ خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَغَيْرِهَا. He says, as for the actions of Allah Azza wa Jal that have been mentioned in the Quran, he says, such as Allah mentioning the creation of the heavens and the earth. He says, فَلْيَفْهَمَ التَّالِي مِنْهَا صِفَاتَ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. And so when you reflect on the actions of Allah, the reciter of the Quran can understand the attributes of Allah. So if I see, that means I have the attribute of what? Seeing. If I engage in the action of looking, then I have to have the attribute of being able to see. So Imam Ghazali, he's saying, if a person reflects over the actions of Allah Azza wa Jal, they can arrive at the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Although a person, theologically speaking, does not attribute something to Allah unless Allah or His Messenger have attributed it to him. If it's not found in the Quran or the Sunnah, then we do not attribute something to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you can derive from Allah's actions attributes. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the one who created the heavens and the earth. And we would call Allah Azza wa Jal Al-Khaliq, the creator. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees, and we'll call Him Al-Basir, and so on and so forth. He says, إِذْ الْفِعْلُ يَدُلُّ عَلَى الْفَاعِلِ فَتَدُلُّ عَظَمَتُهُ عَلَى عَظَمَتِهِ. He says, the action is evidence of the actor. The action indicates and gives indication towards the quality or the attribute of the actor. And therefore, if you look at the greatness of the creation, i.e. or of the action, then you can start to understand the greatness of what? Of the attribute. So, for example, if we were to give a human example, if you read a great book, a book that has been laid out well, the points are amazing, makes you think, takes you on a journey. You say about the author, this author authored an amazing book. The fact that this author can author such a book shows that this author has the attribute of what? Intelligence. Not only intelligence, but profound intelligence. You say, wow. If, for example, you're looking at some art, you're looking at a painting, you can derive from that the painting was painted. And therefore, the person who painted it must have a great eye for painting, whatever you want to call it, talent, whatever. And so, through understanding the greatness of the action, you understand the greatness of the attribute. And so, when we look at the creation of Allah Azza wa Jal, we look at the universe, we look at ourselves, and so on and so forth, we understand the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ability, the greatness of Allah's attribute. And this is how one finds Iman in his or her heart, by reflecting. One of the earlier ulama of Islam, he said, to spend the night reflecting over the creation of Allah Azza wa Jal is more beloved to me than spending the entire night in worship. Why? Because you start to ponder over the creation and the greatness of the creation. It leads you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're left in awe of Allah Azza wa Jal. I'll give you an example. The human mind. What's greater, the universe or the mind that can manipulate the universe? The mind that can manipulate the universe. Although perhaps we will never get to the stage where we can travel to the ends of the universe, Allah knows best. But the mind is capable of utilizing and manipulating the universe to suit its needs. Who created the mind? Allah Azza wa Jal. And so by reflecting over the creation, we understand the greatness of the Creator and so on and so forth. Likewise, provision. Who is the one who provides? The action of providing. Who? Allah. Look at what Allah has provided. From the smallest to the largest, Allah provides for them. And so you can understand the greatness of Allah's quality of or attribute of being the provider. Ar-Razzaq, the one who provides. And so what happens when that enters into your heart? You start to feel content. My provision is coming from Allah Azza wa Jal. My provision is coming from the one who needs no provision himself, who has no need for his own wealth, who is not going to hold back like humans. Humans hold back because they are in need. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is Al-Ghani. He is the one who is not dependent upon anything. And so I start to feel content. I raise my hands and I say to myself, oh Allah, make me a millionaire. And I don't feel like I'm asking for something strange. Why? Because I'm not looking at myself and my capabilities. I'm looking at who? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so you start to feel your heart open up. He says, فَيَنْبَغِي أَن يَشْهَدَ فِي الْفِعْلِ الْفَاعِلْ دُونَ الْفِعْلِ. And this is a point which perhaps many of us, we don't kind of reflect over. He says that a person should look to the fi'l, but see the fa'il rather than the fi'l itself. What's the fi'l? The action. And so someone gives me some money. Let's say I'm in need and someone comes and gives me money. That's called what? Providing. Who is the one who has provided ultimately? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so I don't look at the action of being provided for, rather I look at the provider. And so I start to see Allah in place of Allah's actions. Why? Because the actions of Allah remind me of Him. When it rains, I'm reminded of Allah Azza wa Jal. When I'm eating, I'm reminded of Allah. Why? Because I'm being sustained, I'm being nourished here. By who? By Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on and so forth. Well, as I learn, who's teaching me ultimately? Allah Azza wa Jal. And so rather than looking at the action of Allah teaching me, I'm looking at Al-Alim, the one who knows all things and the one who provides, Ar-Razzaq, because ilm is from a person's rizq, and so on and so forth. And so I become attached to Allah. And then he says, لهذا ينبغي إذا قرأ قوله تعالى أفرأيتم ما تحرثون. Have you not looked at that which you cultivate in the land? أفرأيتم ما تمنون. Have you not looked to that which you release, i.e. the seminal fluid? And in that, again, seminal fluid, literally, liquid, which is then nurtured by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until it becomes what we are right now. Walking, talking, thinking, people with emotions and thoughts, and from what? From a type of liquid. And then he mentions the ayah, أَفَرَأَيْتُمُ الْمَاءَ الَّذِي تَشْرَبُونَ. Have you not looked to the water that you drink? The water that sustains all life. Simply water. When water made up of what? Two things, hydrogen and oxygen, right? But yet it sustains all of life. It's so simple, but yet it sustains all of life. And no matter what drink man invents, we need to add what to it? Water. And nothing beats water in the benefit that it provides for man. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentioned the ayah, أَفَرَأَيْتُمُ النَّارَ الَّتِي تُورُونَ. Have you not looked to the fire that you utilize and you build, and how beneficial the fire is? Who is the one who has created all of these things and provided all of these things, etc.? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, if a person reads these ayat, فَيَنْبَغِي لَهُ أَلَّا يَقْصِرَ نَظَرَهُ أو نظره على الماء والنار والحرث والمني. بل يتأمل في المني وهو نطفة متشابهة الأجزاء ثم ينظر في كيفية انقسامها إلى اللحم والعظم والعروق والعصب وكيفية تشكل الأعضاء. He says, so a person when he looks, for example, to the mani, seminal fluid, he should not simply read it and think about the seminal fluid itself, i.e. Allah created us from this. No, but he should think about how that fluid becomes what? Becomes meat and bones and nerves and so on and so forth. And there are some crazy numbers, like if you lay out a person's blood vessels, they go on for miles and so on and so forth, all coming from what? From a small amount of liquid. And then he says, apply that to the rest. And then he says, وَمَا ظَهَرَ فِيهَا مِنَ السَّمْعِ وَالْبَصْرِ وَالْعَقْلِ, and that which comes from it, from the hearing and the seeing and the ability to perceive. ثُمَّ مَا يَظْهَرُ فِيهَا مِنَ الْغَضَبِ وَالشَّهْوَةِ وَالْكِبْرِ وَالْمُجَادَلَةِ, and likewise from that comes what? Arrogance, haughtiness, anger, desire. All of these things coming from what? From a small amount of liquid that man emits. Then he says, كما قال تعالى أولم يرى الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين. Does man not look to the fact that we created him from a small amount of liquid or small clot, and then he becomes خصيم مبين, someone who argues, and so on and so forth. He says, فليتأمل هذه العجائب ليترقى منها إلى الصفة التي منها صدرت هذه الأعاجيب فلا يزال ينظر إلى الصنعة فيرى الصانع. And so he says, he continues to look in this manner. He looks at the creation of Allah Azza wa Jal until he realizes the Creator. وأما أحوال الأنبياء عليهم السلام فإذا سمع منها كيف كذبوا وضربوا وقتل بعضهم فليفهم منه صفة الاستغناء لله عز وجل عن الرسل والمرسل إليهم. So he says, when he reads about the Anbiya and how they were treated, how they were lied against, how they were killed, and how they were kicked out of their lands, he understands from this the attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being Al-Ghani. He's not in need of the messengers, nor is he in need of those who the messengers were sent to. And this humbles a person. If I turn away from the message of Allah, the Quran, Allah does not need me. Allah has destroyed nations before me who rejected the Rasala of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, what am I? Who am I? Insignificant. Likewise, if someone disbelieves in the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, nations have disbelieved in prophets before, and Allah does not need them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Ghani. He says, وَإِذَا سَمِعَ نَصْرَتَهُمْ فِي آخِرِ الْأَمْرِ فَلْيَفْهَمْ قُدْرَةَ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ وَإِرَادَتَهُ لِنُصْرَةِ الْحَقِّ. And he says, and when a person reads about the victory that was given to the prophets at the end of their journeys, let him understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all capable. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He so pleases, will give victory to those whom He wants to give victory to. And when Allah wants, He will give victory to the truth. And that's very important for us to understand and to reflect upon today in the times that we live in. And we simply have to ask ourselves, do I want to be from those who are given the blessing of being used by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the victory of Islam? Because the victory of Islam is promised and it's coming. It's promised and it's coming. And the enemies of Allah and the enemies of Islam, they are simply trying to deny and delay that which they know is coming. They know it. It's on the horizon. So they're trying to delay it as much as possible. And for us, we don't need to concern ourselves with that. We don't need to become emotional every time we hear someone say something we don't like about Islam, etc. No, we need to focus on ourselves. Focus on our house. Get our house in order. And try to be from those who have the qualities of the victors of Islam, so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might use us. Then he says, وَأَمَّا أَحْوَالُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ كَعَادٍ وَثَمُودَ وَمَا جَرَى عَلَيْهِمْ فَلْيَكُنْ فَهْمُهُ مِنْهُ اسْتِشْعَارَ الْخَوْفِ مِنْ سَطْوَتِهِ وَنَقْمَتِهِ وَلْيَكُنْ حَظُّهُ مِنْهُ الْاِعْتِبَارِ فِي نَفْسِهِ. He says, when he hears about the state of those who lied against the prophets, such as Ad, Thamud, Fir'aun, Lut, Qawm Lut, of course, he should think about that which happened to them They lied. What was the end result? And so when we see the mutakabbirin today mocking Islam and lying and denying, we say, we know where your end is. We know where your end is. And he says, then the reciter should feel fear. And he should be worried about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sovereignty, his ability over all things, and his ability to punish. And he should try to reflect in himself, i.e. look to himself. If I turn away from Allah, what will my result be? My result will be like the result of the people of Ad, the people of Thamud, the people who built houses in mountains that still stand today. Imagine, they still stand today, but Allah destroyed them. We don't know who these people were, as in there's nothing left of them except that which they built. Likewise, say the same about Qawm Fir'aun. Say the same about the Romans. Say the same about the civilizations that came before. We don't know anything about them except the relics that we find. They were destroyed. And so likewise, if I turn away from Allah Azza wa Jal, everything that I feel that I built in this life, Allah can take it away and destroy me as those who came before me were destroyed. That's the reality. So I should humble myself when I read about these people. And then he says, وَكَذَلِكَ إِذَا سَمِعَ وَصْفَ الْجَنَّةِ وَالنَّارِ وَسَائِرِ مَا فِي الْقُرْآنِ. And likewise, when he hears about the rest of that which has been mentioned in the Quran, reflect and try to reflect on oneself, such as paradise and hellfire and so on and so forth. He says, فلا يمكن استقصاء ما يفهم من أو ما يفهم من لأن ذلك لا نهاية له وإنما لكل عبد بقدر رزقه. He says it's not possible for us to mention everything that a person can reflect upon in the Quran here. Why? Because there is no end. The Quran is an ocean that has no depth. It's an ocean that has no depth. If a person were to spend their entire lifetime as a scholar of Islam, a person qualified to study the Quran, they will never end. It's a continual journey. There's no depth to it. And he says, for every servant, every slave of Allah, they will be given that which they have been provided of knowledge and of insight. And of course, there are means, worship and study. He says, فَالْغَرَضُ مِمَّا ذَكَرْنَاهُ التَّنْبِيهُ عَلَى طَرِيقِ التَّفْهِيمِ لِيَنْفَتِحَ بَابُهُ. He says, the purpose of that which we have mentioned above is that a person knows how to approach the Quran in trying to understand it. Why? So that perhaps the door of understanding opens up to the reciter. فَأَمَّا الْإِسْتِقْصَاءُ فَلَا مَطْمَعَ فِيهِ. And as for trying to comprehend everything that one can reflect upon and extract, there's no end to it. And there's no hope. He says, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ فَهْمُ مَا. And the one who has no understanding of the Quran, وَلَوْ فِي أَدْنَى الدَّرَجَاتِ دَخَلَ فِي قَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى. Even if at the very least they're unable to understand a small amount of the Quran, he says he falls into the ayah, وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَسْتَمِعُ إِلَيْكَ حَتَّى إِذَا خَرَجُوا مِنْ عِنْدَكَ قَالُوا لِلَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ مَاذَا قَالَ آنِفًا. They fall into those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about them. Some of them, they listen to you. They listen to the Quran being recited. And then when they leave your circles and your gatherings, they say to those who have been given knowledge, what was he speaking about? أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ طَبَعَ اللَّهُ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبِهِمْ. Those are the ones whom Allah has sealed their hearts. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. And so if a person is unable to understand anything of the Quran, then he is like the person who has been withheld from the Quran because Allah has sealed his heart so that nothing enters into it. He says, وَالطَّابِعْ هِيَ الْمَوَانِعْ الَّتِي سَنَذْكُرُهَا فِي مَوَانِعِ الْفَهْمِ. He says, and what is الطَّابِعْ? What is it? Like there's a linguistical meaning, and then there is the meaning that relates to what we're talking about. He says, what is it? What is the طَابِعْ? What's the seal that a person has on his heart? He says we're going to mention what they are, and they are the preventions of understanding. So there are things that prevent a person from being able to understand the Quran. What are they? And of course, one of the main ones, sin. Sin. And so he's going to mention them في موانع الفهم. And then he moves on to السادس. He says التخلي عن موانع الفهم. So he's going to mention them inshallah, and so we'll go through them next week بإذن الله. وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد.